Hello, good morning and welcome to Thoughts and Updates for this week. I am here at the bottom end of what's called the Cowgate, which is the main street in Kirkland Laing, and the next in the trail is this marker. It's a piece of public art done by Marion Smith. Marion Smith has two pieces along this part of Kirkland Laing. The other one is at the bridge along the way, just at the canal. That has, just like this one, two pieces in it. One is the drawing of a puffer, and the other underneath it is a trout, which is part of the Royal Coat of Arms here. And this is the lace, Lappin lace, sorry, not Lappin, Lappet lace. And you can see an example of Lappet lace in the museum, which is just behind me here, although obviously for reasons which are fairly obvious, there's not a piece of Lappet lace sitting out, I'll get it right, side here for us to look at. I am also next to the library, which is a fairly modern looking building, and like most libraries in Scotland after the pandemic, is not quite under threat, but it is a questionable public building now for some, not for me. As I've said before, the universities of the working class were somewhere that people went to in the 40s, 50s and 60s in order to educate themselves, because the universities were something that if you came from certain parts of Scotland you could not get into, because you were not deemed as clever enough, because the education system did not support your development towards that stage of your life, something that's changed over the last 40, 50, 60 years. We'll come to that later on. So this week, in terms of writing, it's been not a quiet week, but it's been a week where, with Ringside Reports publisher Brad Berkowitz away to the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame, he has just been inducted in there, so he's had a couple of weekends away, and also moving house at the same time means that there's not much going up. But I've been working on a tribute to Kirkland Laing, who lost his life, a very tragic tale of a fantastic boxer. I'm also writing up a little bit about the US television series Bones, which I loved and adored, and talking about why Northern Ireland is really important, given the changes there with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, who I met many years ago as a student, becoming the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. For Talking Buzz, I have reflected on Inui's win last weekend, and looked forward to Lomachenko's over the course of last night, which has ended up with a call for a rematch, which I think Teofimo Lopez may be forced to consider. Of course, Jake Gervonta Davis also won his fight and is now the regular WBA champion at a weight that Josh Taylor has all the other belts. For Scottish Football Supporters Association, there's going to be a couple of weeks off, a hiatus for them. Now we're out the Euros, I think that's probably prompted the desire to take a bit of a break, but I have been looking at Roy Keane's criticism of the English if he were to meet a certain Mr. Clark in a barber shop, but instead of it being about football, I've changed it to being something where I'm quite sure we would find neither of them. And also reflected upon that Euro loss, and look to the future as opposed to what we would normally do, which is look to the past. It's time to change the narrative. So a couple of things that I've learned this week, a couple of things that have been important, I think, are reflecting on the OECD report, and also listening to various things on the radio. BBC Sounds I've always been hugely complimentary of in terms of its drama output, and I finished a couple of weeks ago McCleavey with Brian Cox and Siobhan Redmond, which was absolutely stunning. It's a 12 series of the story of an Edinburgh detective in the late 19th century, and what a fantastic experience it is listening to that. Also, what I've listened to is the whole of the Carlton Hobbs Sherlock Holmes series from the 1950s, which again, fantastic to listen to, absolutely superb. And I'm just finishing this morning an old Paul Temple series on the Gilbert Affair, which again, coming from the 50s and 60s, is just a treat for your lugs. So, big thing I've been reflecting on, I talked about earlier on in terms of exams, is the OECD report, and there's been plenty on Twitter, plenty around about. Particularly a certain Mr. Ross in the Scottish Parliament having a go at Nicola Sturgeon. Now, first of all, the Scottish National Party have not covered themselves in glory in terms of education. Whilst Tony Blair described it as education, 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 and Nicola Sturgeon said, judge me on my record in education, the judgment is not great. There's a few things that I think are absolutely terrible in Scottish education, one of which was the amalgamation of all the colleges to lead us to have these super colleges that I don't think are reflective of local need, and therefore what happens is that the local economy has lost a stalwart, because when you are in a large institution you're not likely to look after the pennies if your only funder is one big national organisation like the Scottish Funding Council. And I think therefore that skews the idea of it being part of a commercial operation, because it's not reflective, it's not responsive, it's not significantly able to put into various communities that require that type of response, a sensitive response, so that it picks up on what it is that's happening in the local community. And I've seen the closure of Cumnock, seen the closure of Girvan before that, in terms of when I was down at Ayr College. Girvan came long before Cumnock did, and long before the amalgamation. But that removal of certain aspects of the services in each of these areas is because of the changes within the funding mechanism, not response to local need, not taking account of what the economy is needing in those areas. So the OECD report, if you don't read it, then you shouldn't be able to talk about it. I think there should be a ban on people who haven't read it. The OECD report tells us, firstly, that the Curriculum for Excellence is a world-leading theory in education. It is reflective of the opportunities that should be given to young people right from ages 3 to 18, that should be adopted and promoted at each and every level. And it's not been for a very simple reason, and that's because of the bit in the middle. Broad general education, junior phase, all of that's absolutely fine. Advanced hires, absolutely fine, because what they do is they mix the idea of examination alongside a long-term project. And those are the assessments that are used. The problem is the examinations. National 5 and higher, we are so caught up in examinations as the platinum standard for testing whether or not people have knowledge. It's not. Full stop, it's not. It's an absolute nonsense. It's educational bingo. For those of you who've sat any English examination, we know that you will be very good at certain aspects of it, and there'll be certain bits that you really struggle with, and you'll hope that the bits that you're good at will come up in the exams, and the bits are rubbish at, that they don't. And what happens is you go in, and it is the luck of the draw as to whether you get what you know or you get what you don't, and your result is based on that. And of course, now there is coursework that goes alongside which changes the dynamic of it. In drama, it took us years to get the SQE to change the higher, so that at least equal weight was given to the practical exam as it was given to the written exam. That's just a nonsense. If you're doing a practical subject, then your practical performance ought to be far more weighty than your theoretical and academic one. That, to me, seems so obvious it shouldn't be said out loud, but it had to be for years. So the OECD report has slated aspects of the implementation of Curriculum for Excellence, and the Scottish National Party have laid down and asked for their tummies to be tickled by people who wanted to get rid of NABs, internal assessments, and replace them with simply teaching to the test, which is the exam. So now we have the alteration of the SQA and the changes in Education Scotland, which I will predict won't be as radical as some people are suggesting. I've got a funny feeling in 2021 examinations shall be part, and a fairly large part, of what replaces examinations. But the opportunity is now for people to grasp the thistle, to start to go, this is a difficult prospect of changing Scottish education so radically that we give people credit for what they can do and don't try to catch them out with what they can. And that would alter the ethos of how we should approach education. Instead of looking for schools to be measured against each other, I think it should be schools who are left to get on. Teachers are given the skills to do internal verification, moderation, not asked to provide candidates to go into not a darkened room, but a lighted room where they have to prove their knowledge or simply demonstrate good memory. But we'll see. There's plenty of time to go before changes are made. It's not going to happen overnight. But we'll be watching. Those of us who work with the academically dispossessed, to see what happens next. So until the next time, it's bye for now.